Welcome, fellow freaks, geeks, and nostalgic peeps, to my channel, Slime and Slashers, where, yeah, we talk about everything from 80s and 90s nostalgia to horror movies and books and beyond. Today's video, we are talking books today. We are going to talk about some recent reads that I've had over the last couple of months. So not my October reads, but a couple of months before October. I haven't talked about those recent reads yet, so stay right where you are, and when we come back from the short intro, you might find a book or two that I've read that you want to read too. Dun 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 dun! This is my August and September wrap-up kind of combined. I will tell you guys that August I was in a reading slump, so there wasn't as much reading as I usually do in August, but I was enjoying other things in life. And I was also getting ready for my readathon to launch in late September, so I was doing a lot of planning in August, not as much reading. And I was just living life to the best of my ability, trying to live life to the fullest. By the way, guys, if you're new here, hello, welcome. Thanks for checking out my channel. I am Kelsi, and I would love it if you consider subscribing and sticking around. But for those of you who are longtime viewers, thank you so much for returning and for being here. Let's get into some stats, and then we'll get into the specific books. So starting with August, I read 7 books total. That totals about approximately 1,805 pages. Approximately 900 minutes listened, an average rating of 4.1, pretty darn good, and I started one series. I have no idea what the series was. I listened to 2 audiobooks, read an ebook, and I used audio and a mixture of physical books for 4 of the 7 reads. Not so bad. 4 of the books were novels, 3 of the books were novellas, 5 were adult reads, 1 was a middle grade, and 1 was a YA book. And for September, it's the complete opposite. I read a ton, but I do want to say that I read a lot of picture books, and I did that in September, but also October. I will not talk about the picture books here because I will talk about them in my October/Halloween-a-thon favorites. And Halloween-a-thon was the event that I was getting ready for in August. It started in late September, so I read a lot of picture books in honor of that event. Again, that will be talked about very, very soon. But when we talk about totals, including those picture books, I read a total of 33 books, quite a lot. I read a total of 4,600 pages. I listened to over 2,000 minutes of audio. I had an average rating of 4.1, again, same average rating as August. Same one for September. Pretty cool. I started 3 series. 7 of the books were audiobooks. 6 of the books were read through ebook. 16 of the books were physical, which is pretty darn good, but again, it's picture books. And 4 of the books I listened to a mixture of audio and read along. 1 of the books was a graphic novel, 10 of the books were novellas, 13 picture books, 9 full-length novels. Okay, going all the way back and rewinding to August of 2024, we will talk about all of the books I read, and we're just going to go in the order in which I read them. So the first book I read back in August, it was a short story collection by none other than the King of Fall, Ray Bradbury. This might be my favorite short story collection, but I do have to say it might be my new favorite because I had a favorite short story collection earlier in this year that I thought was my new favorite, and that was Books of Blood, Volume 1. But I really kind of like this one a little bit more. They're completely different, whereas Clive Barker's writing is very, very dark and very gory and gruesome, but also poetic. Ray Bradbury's kind of more formal, but also poetic, but definitely not as much in terms of gore and in-your-face horror. It's more quiet horror, and some of it's even science fiction leaning. It was a 5-star read for me. It was wonderful. I don't think it would work as well for everyone as it did for me, but if you're interested and if you've already read other things by Ray Bradbury, you might like this short story collection too. However, if you also, like me, loved Books of Blood, Volume 1 by Clive Barker, I don't necessarily think that this book will surpass that book for you as it did for me. It just so happens that I love Ray Bradbury, so I think that was one of the reasons why. I still think that Books of Blood Volume 1 was wonderful, but yeah, this just hit perfectly for me and became a new favorite. Next up, I read And by God's Hand You Shall Die, which is a ode to Italian horror movies, written by David Sodergren. I have talked about this book and The October Country in a vlog I did where I read some of David Sodergren's favorite books, and I also read more of his books, including this one. This one was really fun, really gory, really fast-paced, 4 stars. And I do want to mention that August was, of course, Garb August, hosted by the wonderful Ollie over at the channel Criminale. I was indeed a co-host. However, did I fail at really going ham and really being a great co-host in August for Garb August? Yes! Sadly, yes! It's so sad. I did a terrible job. I'm so sorry, Ollie. I really wish I could have done better as a co-host, but I did read some things for Garb August, including this next book, which is Locke by Paul Zindel. Paul Zindel has written a couple of gnarly middle grade / YA animal attack books, including ones that I've already read, The Rats, and Night of the Bat, I think it was called. I can't remember, but it was a bat book and then a book called The Rats, and both of those were gnarly for being books for kids or even for young teenagers. It was kind of gnarly. So I was expecting the same thing with Locke. However, it was kind of more of a sweet story. It didn't have as much gore, and it wasn't as animal attack-ish as those others by Paul Zindel I read. So this one kind of was a little bit of a letdown for me, but still overall enjoyable. 3.5 stars. I am still excited to read more by Paul Zindel. Next up, another middle grade or book for younger people. We've got a book from the Scareville series, Monsters of Mount Hope, and this is by John Ward. I gave this one a 3.5 as well. It was cute. It's kind of like a modern Goosebumps knockoff series. Nothing overly incredible, but I had the audiobook. It was a fun, easy listen, so I said, why not? And again, like I said, nothing overly memorable, but still a enjoyable overall time. Next up, my book club pick for July that I didn't even get to till August, The Final Gate, which is another book that was inspired and pays homage to the director, the Italian director, Lucio Fulci. I had a blast with this one, 4 stars, very solid, very fun. I wish I could have gotten to it in July so that I could have maybe done a live show in August, but things just were a little too crazy, a little too hectic, but overall, really fun, splattery, good time, solid read. Next up, probably my second favorite read of the month, just behind the October Society, and my friend Kat might scoff at this, but I buddy read this with Kat, of course, from Kat's Novel Adventures, that's who I'm referencing, and we both had very different feelings about it. She was like, oh, this is so trashy, but we had a great discussion about what the ending could have meant and where the characters could have wound up, but this is The Store by Bentley Little, and I had a great trashy time with it. It's like Richard Lehman light. So, in my opinion, it's got Richard Lehman vibes, but it doesn't go as ham, and it's not as hard to defend as Richard Lehman in terms of being somewhat offensive. I feel like more people could like Bentley Little versus Richard Lehman, let's say. And I had a blast with The Store. I'm giving it 4.5 stars. It was such a good time, and the ending, something that is revealed in the end, it is still haunting me, and it's disturbing, and it's unsettling. And this thing is in a lot of vintage horror books, but for some reason it really bothered me in this particular book, and it really got to me, and I was like, oh my god, that's effective, because I'm freaked out and disturbed. Anyway, that was another whole thing, but I really enjoyed the ride. I had a good time, and I can't wait to read more by Bentley Little, because I ain't done with his books. It's my first book by him, but definitely won't be the last. And the last book I read in August was Nightscape by Stephen R. George. This is a vintage horror book. I really enjoyed it. This was my book club book for the month of August, and it actually had an audiobook. Shout out to Crossroad Press for keeping vintage horror alive for us readers who do want to dip our toe into vintage old school horror. Nightscape was not as horror heavy as I anticipated. It had some sci-fi elements. It also had some great character development, and it went into a direction I didn't really expect. So even though it wasn't as horrific as I hoped, especially when you look at the original old school cover, I still really liked the story, and I thought it was really unique overall. And despite it not really fitting into the horror category for me, I'm still giving it a 4.5 because I was just really, really intrigued, and I really liked the story overall. Okay, and now we move into September, and I did 3 different readathons in September. So I started off with doing the Carnival, which is a Patreon-only readathon that I did on my Patreon channel with all my Patreon members, and it was a blast. So everything that I read was either Carnival, Clown, circus or amusement park theme. So you will see that represented in the first couple of books I talk about. Then I switched gears and started to read weird books for the Week of Weird, hosted by Jason's Weird Reads, and of course Crystal over at the channel Fiber Artsy. I had a blast with that. It was a great week of reading. And then finally, right after that, my readathon, watchathon started, Halloweenathon, and I was reading Halloweeny fall books for that. So you will see the 3 different categories and how my reading switched for 3 different time period chunks in September. But starting off with the Carnival type of reads for the Carnival, we have first up Halloween Land by Kevin J. Kennedy. This is a short little novella, and it's a Halloween theme park that pops up out of nowhere, and it's kind of sinister, and bad things take place, and these 2 young people have to figure out what's going on. I didn't really love this because I thought the writing wasn't as good as it could be, and it's a shame because I have read another book edited by Kevin J. Kennedy, and I liked it a lot. So this, I just didn't think it was executed super well. It kind of read where it was YA, but it also felt adult at times, so I was kind of confused, like, who is this meant for? I just thought there could have been a lot more action, a lot more horror, and a lot more overall character development, so I settled on the 3. Not my favorite read of the month, for sure, but my reads got better from there. So next up, I read Dreamwoods by Patrick Lacey. This one was a solid 4-star read. It is about a creepy amusement park. Think Disney World, but evil. So this guy gets lured back to this evil Disney World. He remembers going there as a kid, and he thinks going there will fix all of his marital troubles and all of his family troubles with his kids, but it just kind of creates more problems, and you'd have to read it to see what I mean, but I had a great time with that one. Next up, I read a clown-themed book. We have Cotton Candy Massacre Part Toots, and sadly, I did not like this as much as the first one. The first book was a 5-star read for me. This book was a 4-star read. However, still enjoyable, still really fun. We kind of follow a character who survives from the first book, and she's not, let's say, purely good. She's kind of a gray character in that she's doing evil things, but can she be saved? I'm not going to get into too many details again because it's the second book in a series. I just think that the narration, unfortunately, the audiobook narration, affected my enjoyment because I couldn't stand the clown's voice. And so maybe I should have read it physically only, and I think I would have maybe enjoyed it a little bit more. Maybe it would have been a 4.5. And I can't help but let that experience affect my rating just because, I don't know, it kind of just tainted the experience. So it's hard to separate the narration voice from how I feel about the book, because it goes hand in hand. But I'm still intrigued, and I still want to read the 3rd book in the series, so. And this was still enjoyable, like I said, just not as amazing as the first book, in my opinion. Next up, I read Freezer Burn by Joe R. Lansdale, and this was so good. This was about a seedy guy who gets involved in this terrible holdup. It goes awry, and not only does the holdup go awry, but a whole bunch of other things, and almost like a domino effect, go terribly wrong for him, and he ends up on the run, and he joins a kind of traveling circus. It's not really like your traditional circus, it's more like a traveling, quote, freak show in a way. So what develops from there is more of a character study than a plot-heavy type of story. I think it's definitely character-driven. We are really examining our main character. Can he reform? Can he find a new happy life? And if he can't, what is going to stand in his way and why? And so it's just a really, really great study about a person and how people aren't just, you know, completely good and completely bad. There's a lot of gray areas, and I loved that examination in the book. But yeah, there was a lot of tension, and I really was surprised by the ending, and I was like, oh my god! I just loved it. 4.5 stars. It was wonderful. A standout. Next up, I read another sequel to a book I read last year in September. So the sequel is The Pyo Traveling Show, and it's the sequel to the first book, which is The Pyo Family Circus. I gave that first book, I believe, a 5-star. I'm giving the second book a 4.5 star. Still loved it. Had the same bleak, dark, kind of ironic humor, had the same kind of gory zaniness and the weirdness that it had in the first book. So I just loved it, and I really liked how the story wrapped up. It was awesome. I had a great time. I really want to read more by this author because both of the books in the series I just loved, and I think it's one of the more unique series when it comes to books about carnivals and clowns. This one's very different from other books about carnivals or clowns that I've read. Next up, I read a book by Ian Fortey called Clown in the Dark, and sadly, this wasn't the hit that I wanted it to be. It was still solid, 3.5 stars. I didn't hate it or anything. I still had an enjoyable time for the most part, but I just wanted more creepiness, more creepy clown action, and also I just wanted it to be as funny as what I read from Ian Fortey a year or two ago, which was a book called Werecage, about essentially a werewolf Nicolas Cage. And that book was so funny, so fun, but also heartfelt. This one just didn't have as much to offer, in my opinion, so I wouldn't start with this if you're just checking out Ian Fortey for the first time, but still a decent clown book. Next up, a book that randomly came upon my radar when I was searching for Carnival and clown books on KU. So this is a KU book, and it doesn't have audio, but I didn't let that stop me somehow, and I actually read the whole thing, and it was so enjoyable. It's the first book I've read by this author, and the book is Montague's Carnival of Delights and Terror by Jamie Stewart. And I liked it so much that I picked another book by Jamie Stewart to be a book club book for 2025. And I will go through my book club reads and my book club choices for next year in an upcoming video here soon. But I loved this so much. Again, 4.5 stars. Essentially, we've got this creepy carnival. It reminded me of Something Wicked This Way Comes, but with another element that I don't want to spoil, and that other supernatural type of element involved in this story was done in a different way than I usually see it done. So I loved it, and I also thought the characters were really well written. It reminded me of an old school style of book, but it's a newer book, so I think that could be another reason why I really liked it. Next up, Golden Land Past Dark. This one was great because it was a good segue as I was about to start the Week of Weird. It was a good segue between the Carnival, where I was reading all these clownish books, and then the Week of Weird, where I was hoping to read a lot of weird books. So this had clowns, it had like circus action, but it also had weirdness. It was definitely a unique story. We follow this little guy named, I can't exactly remember how to pronounce this guy's name, but he's a 16-year-old stunted hunchback devoted to perfecting the surreal clown performances that come to him in his dreams. And there's really not a ton of action. This is another character study, so I don't think it would be great for everyone, but I loved it because I thought it was such an interesting examination of our main character and his relationships, and it had a really intriguing, thought-provoking ending, and the whole thing in general was thought-provoking, and the whole time you never know what to really believe. So I don't know, it just had a lot of weird elements that I personally enjoyed. So this was a hit for me, and it was a 5-star read. I loved it. Next up, I had to catch up on a previous month's Richard Lehman read-along book, so I had to read Dark Mountain by Richard Lehman, and this one was sadly a very boring Richard Lehman. And I can forgive Richard Lehman for some of his over-sexualized characters and some of the deplorable things that he writes, because his books are fun and they're page turners. However, what I can't forgive is when Richard Lehman's a little boring and he lets a story fall flat. And that, I think, was the case with Dark Mountain. We spend so much time with this family on their camping trip, and not enough time with the threat to the family, who are kind of watching them from afar. So there's just a lot going on, as in a lot of nothing going on, until we get to the action, which is all packed in near the end. And, you know, it didn't really completely work for me, so I'm just giving it a 3-star. The end was fun. I just wish it had more, and that the action that it did have would have come sooner. And now you will see my read switch from Carnival to Weird reads officially for the Week of Weird. And my first book I finished for that was By the Light of Dead Stars by Andrew Van Wey. I had a blast with this book. It was so much fun, very enjoyable. I actually started this back in March for the first round of the Week of Weird, but I did not get to finish it because life was crazy. So I decided to pick it back up, and I didn't really have to start from the beginning because I remembered a lot of the story. So I just went a few chapters back and started to read it again, almost from where I left off. This was fantastic. I cannot wait to continue on with the series because this is the first book of a series. It definitely had the weird vibes, especially near the end, but we do kind of spend a lot of time getting to know our main character and her uncle, who is now her guardian, taking care of her after her parents had a terrible accident and they moved to a new town, and strange things are afoot in this weird town, and that's where a lot of the story unfolds and a lot of the action unfolds and a lot of the weirdness comes in. But again, that kind of takes a while, but I did not mind that. And overall, this was so much fun, 4.5 stars. Next up, I read a quick little novella called I Found a Circus Tent in the Woods by Ben Farthing. This one was decent, very solid, not my favorite book I read for the week of weird. It also had Carnival vibes, so I was still kind of throwing in some clown and Carnival vibes in there. This one was about 3.5 stars for me, about a man and his son who come across a random circus tent in the woods, hence the name of the story, and they kind of get sucked into exploring it, and that might have been a bad thing. Solid, but not anything amazing in my opinion. Then we come to probably my favorite read, not only of the week of weird, but my favorite read of the entire month. We have The Hike by Drew McCary, and I freaking loved this book so much. It was just beyond weird. It was a wild ride. It was adventurous. I don't think it would work for everybody, but something about it really worked for me. I loved the audiobook too, and there was this great crab character. This crab was hilarious. I loved him. That was my favorite character. But overall, very thought-provoking about life, and I just had such a good time reading it. Wonderful book, 5 stars, easy 5. Next up, going back to more clown-related books, but this one was also weird. This is Mr. Jacobs versus the Demonic Clowns from the Great Beyond, and I think this was on KU. I rated this at 3.5 stars. It definitely had some humor to it, so it wasn't just weird. It was weird and humorous, and it had clowns, so you would think with all of that I would have rated it higher. However, some of the humor didn't hit perfect for me, and other parts of the humor I did laugh out loud, so I was kind of torn. I thought 3.5 would be a fair rating, but it was definitely a unique book. It's not like your typical clown book, that's for sure. It was a good time. Next up, another weird book, and this one I read for my friend Katrina's book club. You can find my friend Katrina over at the channel Katrina Brown, and her book club is called the Reaper Book Club, and her book club book for the month of September was House of Rot. I loved this. Again, another great weird book, solid 4 stars. I have to go back and watch Katrina's book club discussion on this because I'm sad I missed it, and I think it's one of those books that you could really dissect and really talk about for a long time, so I'm gonna have to go and check that out because I'm interested to see what other people think of it, because I really had a good time with it. And last weird book, but not least, I read The Weirdest World, which is more of a short story than a book itself. This is by A.R. Lafferty, and this was the official group read for the Week of Weird, again hosted by Crystal and Jason, and I gave this one 4 stars. It's about a blob who is from outer space and finds himself on Earth, and the blob, oh poor guy, he goes through all these trials and tribulations and finds out that humanity is not always full of good people. Like, Earth is not full of good peeps, essentially. So, yeah. I really enjoyed it, but I feel bad for the blob. I feel sad for the blob, he cries and peeps and cries and peeps. Just forget it. I'm trying to rewrite the blob song and it's not gonna work, whatever. Alright, and now you will see my reads switch from weird to Halloweeny reads, because at this point in the month, my readathon, watchathon, Halloweenathon started officially, so we now move into Halloweeny things. First up, I did not rate this because I don't know how to rate it. It's got the words of Ray Bradbury from his story Something Wicked This Way Comes, but it's a graphic novel and has, drawings and artwork in it. I did not like the art style at all, and I thought it could be done so much differently, and not only did I not like the art style, but it is in black and white, which I think is such a missed opportunity. If you're going to adapt Something Wicked This Way Comes into a graphic novel, I say you got to go crazy with the colors. It's one of the best fall-centric stories ever written, and if you're gonna adapt it in a graphic novel, why not use some of those great fall colors? I don't know. I was left very disappointed, but I, to be fair, am not going to rate it, because I honestly don't know how to rate something like this that is basically an adaptation of a great book. I just don't know, so. And then randomly, I picked up a romance, and it was a Halloween-themed romance called My Halloween Romance by Wendy Dalrymple. I loved this book. It was so cute. Nothing groundbreaking in terms of a romance book. It was just cute, sweet, a good time. It had some great Halloween vibes, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Not any spice at all, essentially, so if you're looking for that, this might not be up your alley, but I had a great time with it. It was about 2 people who used to know each other as kids. They run into each other again as the girl comes back to the hometown after being away for a while, and they start to fall in love, maybe? No spoilers, but that's kind of what happens in a romance book. Next up, a short story collection. I was sent this physical copy by the author. Thank you so much. Again, I love this book. 4.5 stars. A great collection of stories. If you have any kind of nostalgia for scary stories to tell in the dark, you've got to pick this up. Not only are the stories fantastic, but the illustrations in this book are great and creepy. And I know you probably can't see it too good, but there's like a creepy dude in this eyeball. And I really don't want to give away too many other illustrations because it could spoil some of the stories, but trust me when I say this book is fantastic, and it is very reminiscent of the feels and the vibes of scary stories to tell in the dark. And I think if you like that, or if you have a kid who you think would like stories like that, I would say definitely pick this up. Any nostalgia fan, I think, would enjoy this, or any horror fan, or anybody who's a fan of both, by chance. Next up, another Richard Lehman book, and this was my official Richard Lehman read-along book for the month of September. I'm doing the Richard Lehman Project with my friend Christine, and we both agree that this book was one of the more fun Lehman books. I had a great time with this. We've got this terrible main character who is really bad with people, and he's trying to bring back girls from the dead so he can create, like, his perfect girlfriend. And, you know, things don't go perfectly to plan, but lots of fun, lots of zaniness. I had a great time with this book. 4 stars, and Christine gave it the same rating, so I'm so glad she finally found a Richard Lehman for the first time in a couple of months that worked well for her, and I'm glad it worked for me too. And my last book for September was The Pumpkin House by Chad P. Brown. This was a book on KU. It was a solid read. It had a lot of Halloween atmosphere, but it did cover some heavy topics. So if you're looking for a lighter read when it comes to finding Halloween vibes, I wouldn't say this one's it. We've got 2 kids as the main characters, and they're both sharing their life traumas to each other. And there is this creature who is said to destroy and kill people who don't have a pumpkin carved to represent their soul and protect their soul on Halloween. So you can kind of connect the dots of what might happen as the story unfolds, but it's kind of heavy. I gave it 3.5 stars, but still worth a read if it sounds intriguing to you. And overall, that wraps up my September and also all of the August books that I read too, since I had to go through both of those months. I hope you enjoyed hearing about all the books I read. I think overall it was 2 great months for me in terms of quality reads overall. Again, August was kind of slumpy, but I still enjoyed other things, and I needed that kind of break to gear up for the crazy September and for all the books I was going to get to in September. Plus, I was watching movies in September too, by the way. Alright guys, have you read any of the books that I talked about today? If so, let me know what you think. Did you agree with my thoughts? Do you have other thoughts? I don't care. I want to know whatever you want to let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. And if you just want to tell me you were here but you can't think of what to say, you could always just leave me an awesome clown emoji for the Carnival. Or you can just leave me a corn emoji, whatever you want to do. For this time, guys, that is it for me. Till next time, you know what you can do. Keep on killing it. Bye, guys!